It was almost midnight. The house was quiet. I had just brushed my teeth and turned off the light. My phone rang. The sound cut through the silence like a knife. I looked at the screen. It was Mom. My heart dropped. Mom never called this late. I picked up the phone quickly. Her voice was shaking. "Your dad. He can't breathe," she said. I froze. "What? What happened?" "I don't know. I'm calling the ambulance now." Then the line went silent. For a second I couldn't move. The room felt small, like the air had disappeared. Then I grabbed my jacket and ran. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely zip it. Outside the air was cold. The street was empty and dark. I waved at the first taxi I saw. "Hospital, please! Fast!" I said. The driver looked at me through the mirror. He nodded and stepped on the gas. City lights passed by in flashes, red, yellow, blue. I kept staring out the window, my thoughts racing. I remembered Dad laughing at dinner last night. He looked so healthy. How could this happen so suddenly? "Please be okay," I whispered. I said it again and again, like a prayer. The driver turned down the radio. He didn't say a word, but I could feel his eyes on me. He knew. He had seen this before. Fear in the middle of the night. When we stopped at the hospital, I threw some cash on the seat. "Good luck," the driver said softly. I nodded, unable to answer. The hospital doors slid open with a loud hiss. The light was too bright. Everything smelled like disinfectant. I ran to the front desk. "My father," I said, gasping. "Heart problem. Ambulance. Just came." The nurse typed something fast. "Name?" she asked. I told her. She looked up and pointed. "Emergency room down the hall." I started running again. My heart pounded so loud I could hear it in my ears. People in white coats moved quickly. Machines beeped in the distance. I felt like I was inside a dream, a bad dream that wouldn't end. When I saw my mom, she was standing by the wall. Her face was pale. Her hands were pressed together as if she was praying. She looked at me and whispered, "He's inside." Her voice cracked. I walked to her and took her hand. It was cold, almost shaking. We didn't talk. We just stood there, listening to the machines, the footsteps, the ticking clock. Everything felt unreal. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. I just kept thinking one thing. Please don't take him away. The hallway was bright and cold. The white walls looked endless. Mom and I sat on a long metal bench outside the emergency room. The air smelled like medicine and fear. No one spoke. Only the clock on the wall made a sound. Tick, tick, tick. Each second felt like an hour. Mom's hands were shaking. I held them tight. "They are helping him," I said softly. She nodded, but her eyes stayed on the floor. Across the hallway, a nurse walked by with a chart. Her shoes made soft sounds on the tile floor. I watched her disappear behind the doors. Then it was quiet again. I looked at Mom. Her face looked older in the hospital light. There were small lines around her mouth I had never noticed before. She whispered, "He looked fine this morning." Her voice cracked a little. I wanted to say something, but I didn't know what. Words felt useless. So I just said, "He will be fine." But inside, I wasn't sure. Time passed, but I couldn't tell how long. People came and went. A baby cried somewhere far away. A man coughed. The clock kept ticking. I stared at the door that said, "Emergency room." Behind that door, doctors were fighting for my father's life, and I could do nothing but sit. It made me feel small. Mom closed her eyes. Maybe she was praying. I looked at the floor, then at the ceiling, then back at the door. Every time the door opened, my heart jumped, but it was never for us. A young doctor finally came out. He wore glasses and his face looked calm. "Family of Mr. Lee?" he asked. We both stood up quickly. "He is in the emergency room now," he said. "We are giving him medicine to help his heart." "Can we see him?" I asked. "Not yet," he said gently. "Please wait a little longer." He gave a small smile before walking away. It was the kind of smile that tried to give hope, but didn't promise anything. Mom sat down again. I sat beside her. She leaned her head on my shoulder. I could feel her breathing, fast, shallow. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know," I said. "Me too," I thought. We sat there for what felt like forever. The night outside was silent. The world kept moving, but inside this room, time stood still. I looked at my reflection of the window. My eyes looked tired, but also awake. I whispered to myself, "Please, Dad, don't give up." The nurse called my name. "Can you come with me?" she said. I followed her down the long hallway. My steps felt heavy. She handed me a small paper. "Take this to the pharmacy," she said. I nodded and walked away. The hospital at night was quiet but full of movement. I could hear the sound of wheels, machines, and low voices. Everything smelled like metal and alcohol. I held the paper in my hand like it was something important. The pharmacy was near the corner of the building. The light inside was soft and yellow. A man in a white coat was counting pills behind the counter. I sat on a plastic chair to wait. Next to me sat an old woman. Her hair was grey and she wore a pink sweater. She looked calm, almost peaceful. She smiled at me. "Long night?" she asked. I tried to smile back. "Yes," I said. "My dad is in the emergency room." She nodded slowly. "My husband is there too," she said. "He fell this evening." We sat in silence for a while. Her hands rested on her knees. They were small and full of wrinkles. She looked at me again and said, "They are strong, you know. The ones we love, stronger than we think." Her voice was soft, but it reached deep inside me. For the first time that night, I felt something warm in my chest. "Thank you," I said quietly. She smiled. "Don't lose hope," she said. Then she looked up as if talking to herself. "Hope keeps us alive." The pharmacist called her name. She stood up slowly. Before leaving, she put her hand on mine. Her skin was warm. "You should go back to your family," she said. "He needs you strong." I watched her walk away. Her steps were slow but steady. Something about her calmness stayed with me. Maybe she had been here many times before. Maybe she already knew what it meant to wait like this. I took the medicine and walked back through the hallway. The air felt a little lighter now. I could still hear the machines, the ticking clock, the soft whispers. But something inside me had changed. When I saw Mom again, she looked up at me. I smiled at her, a real smile this time. "She said he's strong," I told her. Mom didn't know who I was talking about, but she nodded and said, "He is." We both sat quietly, holding the small box of medicine. Outside the window, I saw the first light of dawn begin to show. It wasn't morning yet, but it was coming. The night felt endless. Mom and I sat side by side, still holding hands. Every sound made me jump. The door opening, a footstep, a whisper. I couldn't tell if it was minutes or hours. Then the door opened again. A doctor stepped out. He looked tired, but calm. He took off his mask and asked, "Family of Mr. Lee?" We both stood up at the same time. My legs felt weak. "Yes," I said quickly. He looked at us and smiled a little. "He's stable now," he said. For a moment I couldn't breathe. "Stable?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "We gave him treatment in time. His heart is weak, but he's safe for now." Mom covered her mouth and started crying. The sound came out like a broken breath. I felt my knees shaking. The doctor kept talking, but I could only hear the words "safe for now." "Can we see him?" I asked. "Just one person for a few minutes," the doctor said kindly. Mom nodded to me. "Go," she whispered. I walked down the hall. The lights were soft here, and the air smelled different, cleaner, quieter. When I reached the room, I stopped at the door. Through the glass, I saw my father. He was lying on the bed, pale but breathing. A small tube was connected to his hand. Machines around him blinked slowly, making soft beeping sounds. I walked closer. "Dad," I said softly. His eyes opened a little. When he saw me, he smiled. It was a small smile, weak but real. "You scared me," I said, trying to laugh, but my voice broke. He blinked slowly. "Sorry, kiddo." His voice was rough, but hearing it made my chest feel warm again. I sat beside him. We didn't talk much. There were no big words to say. Just being there was enough. After a while, a nurse came in and said, "Time's up." I nodded. Before leaving, I touched his hand gently. It was warm now. When I walked back to Mom, she stood up quickly. I smiled and said, "He's okay." Mom started crying again, this time with relief. She hugged me tight. I felt her body shaking. Outside the window, the sky was still dark, but I could see a thin line of light. It wasn't morning yet, but it was close. I whispered, "We made it through the night." For the first time, the hospital didn't feel cold anymore. It felt alive, with hope, with love, with breath. The night finally ended. The hallway was quiet now. Nurses spoke softly. A cleaner pushed a cart past me. Everything smelled like coffee and sunlight. I hadn't slept at all. My eyes hurt, but I didn't care. Dad was safe. That was enough. Mum was sitting by the window, drinking water from a paper cup. Her face looked tired but peaceful. She smiled when she saw me. "Did you sleep?" I asked. She shook her head. "You?" I smiled back. "No." We both laughed a little. I walked to the window. Outside, the city was waking up. Cars moved slowly. A bird landed on the railing. The sky turned soft pink, then gold. Morning light filled the room. Something in my chest loosened. The fear, the waiting, the noise. All of it was fading. It felt like I could finally breathe again. Then, across the hall, I saw her, the old woman from the pharmacy. She was walking slowly, pushing a wheelchair, but the chair was empty. I froze. She looked smaller in the morning light. Her eyes were red, but she was smiling. Softly, like she had made peace with something. When she noticed me, she stopped. Our eyes met through the glass. She gave me a small nod. It was the same kind of nod people give when words are too heavy to say. I stood there, unable to move. A part of me wanted to run to her, to say something, anything. But she just turned and walked away, her pink sweater bright against the white walls. I felt tears in my eyes. Not for me this time, but for her. For all the people who waited through the night and didn't get the same ending. Mum came up behind me. "What's wrong?" she asked. I wiped my eyes and said softly, "Nothing. Just someone I met." Mum nodded, as if she understood. We walked back to Dad's room together. He was awake now, smiling weakly at us. I sat beside him and took his hand. It was warm and strong. He looked at me and whispered, "Morning already?" "Yeah," I said. "The longest night is over." Outside, the sun rose higher. The world was bright again. I held his hand tighter and whispered, "I'm here. You're safe now." And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly alive.